My brother Mark leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with false pity. "She's a fake vet. No benefits, no proof. She lied to steal from Dad." Laughter rippled in the courtroom, my family nodding behind him. I stayed still, hands folded, eyes steady. Then David, my lawyer, rose in silence and placed a sealed envelope before the judge. The red wax cracked, and so did Mark's certainty. He thought he was dismantling me in front of everyone. What he didn't know was that this envelope carried more weight than our father's entire estate, and more power than Mark had ever imagined. "Hi, I'm Anna Jensen. They used to call me the librarian. It started as a casual nickname, something tossed around at family gatherings when people didn't know what else to say about me. Oh, Anna. She's like a librarian, always quiet, always tucked away with her little papers." What began as a joke hardened into identity. I became the supporting character in my brother Mark's dazzling biography, the girl who organized the footnotes while he strutted in the headlines. At Sunday dinners, applause was practically a family ritual. My brother would arrive late, tossing his car keys onto the table, like he was dropping a grenade, launching into stories about real estate deals that sounded larger than life. My father would uncork champagne I knew had cost more than my college semester books, and the cork's sharp pop always felt like a starter pistol for another round of praise. My mother's eyes would glow as if Mark were anointed, chosen, untouchable. Me, I learned the choreography of smallness. Smile politely, nod encouragingly, tuck my own stories back into my pocket before they could embarrass anyone. Once during one of those dinners, I tried. Just once. The room had quieted after another round of Mark's, boasting he had just closed a waterfront property, something about square footage and investors, and I cleared my throat softly. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "I got a commendation at work," I said. My mother, Carol, didn't even look up from adjusting her napkin. She patted my hand the way you might soothe a restless child. "That's nice, dear. Employee of the month." The words dripped with that poisonous sweetness that can only come from a parent who doesn't realize or doesn't care how much they've just diminished you. My brother smirked. The conversation flowed right back to him, and I was left staring at the fingerprints smudged on my champagne glass, wondering why I had bothered speaking at all. I told myself I was fine with it, that I didn't need their applause. But the truth is, silence leaves bruises too, and they don't fade quickly. There were nights when I sat alone in my apartment in D.C., peeling off the mask of the policy analyst they thought I was. I'd stare at the plain walls and think about how thoroughly my life had been rewritten for them. They believed I had washed out of graduate school a failed PhD student who settled for mediocrity. That lie was my cover story, the one they clung to, the one they whispered about behind my back, the one that gave them permission to dismiss me. What they didn't know, my real work took place in a concrete facility without windows, a skiff-sensitive compartmented information facility, a sterile humming box where servers held secrets heavier than any skyscraper Mark could ever close a deal on. In that world, I wasn't Anna the librarian. I was Echo 7, a clandestine case officer trusted with decisions that determined who lived and who died. I remember one night clearly. Fluorescent light humming above me, eyes fixed on a screen glowing with intercepted signals. I had to make a call if I was wrong. An entire network of assets could be wiped out. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady. "General, the encryption key is compromised. We need to initiate blind harvest now." On the other end of the line, General Peterson didn't question me, didn't doubt. He simply said, "Your call. Echo 7. Execute." In that moment, I wasn't invisible. I was the fulcrum of a mission that mattered. But to my family, I was still the librarian, still the invisible daughter who wasn't worth listening to. I carried this double life in silence, but sometimes the contrast was unbearable, like the time Mark crashed Dad's car in college and my parents scrambled to cover it up, draining savings to protect his reputation. I meanwhile had worked 2 jobs just to afford a busted laptop after mine died in the middle of finals. Mark was praised for taking risks. I was chastised for being too careful. The imbalance was suffocating, but I played my role. I sat through the dinners, watched the parades of champagne toasts, kept my silence, while my brother's voice filled every corner. My father, God rest him, was the only one who seemed to see through the cracks. He never asked questions he knew I couldn't answer, but sometimes when we were alone, he'd give me a look. A small, weighted look like he knew there was more, like he respected it. It wasn't enough to erase years of dismissal, but it was something. When he died, I thought maybe the family would soften. Maybe grief would level us. Instead, at the funeral reception, the pattern repeated itself. The room smelled of lilies and old carpet. My brother stood in the center, holding court with condolences in one hand and his phone in the other, accepting sympathy like it was his birthright. I hovered near the wall, a ghost at my own father's farewell. Colonel Holt, a retired family friend, made his way toward me. His handshake was warm, his eyes filled with genuine sympathy. "Your father was proud of you," he began. And before I could answer, Mark's heavy arm landed on my shoulder. He gave the colonel a conspiratorial smirk. "Don't mind my sister. She's got one of those government desk jobs. The most dangerous thing she's ever faced is a paper cut." The colonel's eyes flickered to me, searching, questioning. I smiled tightly, the kind of smile that hurts more than tears. I stayed silent, but inside, something snapped. Not in fire or fury. No, it was colder than that. A clean, precise break like ice cracking on a winter lake. That was the moment I stopped seeing my family as people to win over and started seeing them as variables in a problem set. That was the moment I realized silence wasn't just survival. It could also be a weapon. The breaking point didn't come with a scream. It came with precision, like the click of a switch you didn't even know was wired to explode. After the funeral reception, the house was heavy with silence, the kind that feels like it has weight. Plates still sat on the counter, half-empty glasses clouded with fingerprints. I moved through the rooms like a shadow, noticing every detail, the faint scent of lilies, the indent in the carpet where my father's chair used to be, the photographs on the wall that showed my brother's life in glossy frames while mine existed only in the blurred background. In the quiet, I found myself staring at my father's cufflinks, simple silver, unadorned. He'd worn them for every important moment of his life. Court hearings, promotions, even my high school graduation. They weren't flashy, but they were solid, steady. I slipped them into my pocket without a word. That was the first conscious step toward my decision. For years, I had told myself this was family drama, an emotional knot I just hadn't figured out how to untangle. I thought if I stayed patient, if I stayed small, they might eventually see me. But Mark's words at the funeral reception, that cruel joke about my service, the way he erased me with a laugh, made something clear. This wasn't drama. It was strategy. He had been shaping the narrative for years, one cutting remark at a time, until the story of my life became whatever he decided to say about me. I realized then that I'd been treating a war like a dinner table argument, and I was done. When the notice arrived weeks later that Mark was formally contesting the will, accusing me of lying to our father about serving my country, I didn't feel rage or heartbreak. What I felt was a strange, cold clarity. It wasn't personal anymore. It was operational. He had escalated the battlefield. Fine. I knew how to fight there. I dialed a number few people even knew existed. The line crackled faintly before David Chen's voice came through. Former JAG Corps, one of the sharpest legal minds the agency ever recruited to handle situations like this. He didn't waste time with sympathy. "Tell me what you want," he said. My answer was immediate. "We don't argue. We don't beg for sympathy. We end this with something that cannot be questioned." A pause on the line. Then quietly, "You want the nuke." "Yes," I said. My voice was steady. Together, we built the plan. Step 1, bait. Mark needed to accuse me under oath. He had to say it formally on the record that I had fabricated service, that I had committed stolen valor. We both knew his arrogance wouldn't allow him to resist. Step 2, the weapon. A classified protocol few lawyers had even heard of, an ODNI verification letter. Not a discharge paper, not a DD-214, nothing public. Just a sealed document addressed to a presiding judge authorizing them to be read into my status in camera. It wouldn't explain what I did. It would simply confirm that I was who I said I was, and it would make further argument impossible. Step 3: timing. The letter would not appear until the exact moment Mark had committed himself fully. The trap would spring in silence. I remember sitting in the SIF as I drafted the request. The fluorescent lights hummed, the servers whispered like restless ghosts. My fingers moved across the keyboard typing sentences that could never exist outside that room. Requesting verification of service for judicial proceeding, scope limited, exposure risk material, necessity compelling, each word was sterile clinical. But behind every one was a lifetime of silence I was about to weaponize. When I hit send, the progress bar crawled across the screen like a measured heartbeat. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For years, I had begged silently to be seen. Now I was about to make it impossible not to see me. David called me days later. His voice was steady, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "We're green. ODNE approved. Envelope will be in my hand on court day." I didn't thank him. Instead, I just said, "Delivery is everything." He chuckled once, a sound without humor. "At altitude," he said, meaning at the highest point of Mark's arrogance. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I prepared the way I did for missions. I kept my body sharp early runs on a treadmill in a basement gym where the news screens replayed last year's disasters. I ate meals with the bland efficiency of someone who couldn't afford distraction. I laid out my suit Navy professional forgettable. I tucked my father's cufflinks into the inner pocket of my briefcase like talismans. Every object in my apartment became symbolic. The kettle counting down seconds, the dead succulent, reminding me that things without care wither, the fortune slip tucked into my wallet. The quiet one has teeth. I thought about my mother sometimes, about what she might say if she knew what I was doing. Probably she would beg me not to embarrass Mark. Probably she would call me cruel. But her voice didn't matter anymore. Her approval was just another ghost I'd been chasing. I had stopped chasing. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled like old wood and ambition. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking softly, each step measured. My family was already inside, seated behind Mark, their faces arranged into masks of loyalty. He was at the front, straightening his expensive suit, basking in the glow of his own confidence. He thought he knew the ending of the story. I folded my hands on the table and lowered my gaze, slipping back into the role they had always written for me. The quiet one, the background character, the librarian. Let him believe it. Let him think I was small. Arrogance makes the trapdoor feel like a red carpet. And Mark was already walking straight toward it. Mark had no idea he was already performing inside a trap. That was the beauty of it. He thought the stage was his, when in reality the script had been written weeks before he stepped onto the stand. The courtroom was stale with expectation. Wooden benches creaked. The air carried that faint scent of dust and cheap coffee. My family sat behind him, a wall of certainty in black suits and polished shoes, nodding in rhythm with his every movement. I could feel their gaze on me, dismissive, even smug. To them, I was just the librarian again, the little sister who never measured up, dragged here to be humiliated one final time. The bailiff called Mark to the stand. He adjusted his tie as though about to deliver the keynote speech at a banquet. His steps were confident, echoing across the tile, his shoulders squared in the posture of a man who believed he had already won. I watched him sit, watched him lean toward the microphone, and I saw not my brother, but a target. Arrogance has a particular smell, sharp metallic, like the moment before lightning splits the air. He began with practiced sincerity. "My sister," he said, pausing to let his voice tremble with manufactured sadness, "has never served a day in uniform." His eyes flicked toward me briefly, gloating before returning to the judge. "She fabricated a story of military service to manipulate our dying father, to steal what rightfully belongs to me. She has no discharge papers, no VA benefits, no record. This is stolen valor, plain and simple. The words rippled across the room like poison poured into water. My mother's lips tightened with righteous anger. A cousin shook his head in theatrical disappointment. I could almost hear the unspoken judgment. How could Anna do this to her own family? But I remained perfectly still, hands folded, eyes steady, breathing slow and even. Inside, I wasn't hearing my brother. I was hearing the soft click of tumblers inside a lock, each accusation sliding into place exactly as I had predicted. He was testifying under oath, sealing his own arrogance into the permanent record. Bait taken, trap sprung. David, my lawyer, didn't interrupt. He sat beside me, expression unreadable, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the sealed envelope. He didn't glance at me, didn't break the stillness. We had agreed. No theatrics, no protests, no objections. Just wait. Let Mark dig as deep as he wanted. The deeper he went, the harder the fall would be. I allowed myself a single flashback in that moment, not to my brother's childhood triumphs or my mother's dismissals, but to a DIA briefing room. The screen had glowed with satellite images, and my handler had once said, "Patience is not the absence of action. It's the art of waiting for the perfect strike." That was exactly what this was. Not a family argument, not even a legal dispute. It was an operation. Mark leaned back when he finished, lips curling into a satisfied smirk. He had delivered his venom. He believed it had landed. Around the courtroom, I felt the atmosphere thicken with his confidence. Even the judge looked weary, as though preparing himself for another dreary inheritance dispute. Then David rose. He didn't rush. He didn't clear his throat. He simply stood, a deliberate calm in every movement, and addressed the judge with the kind of formality that made the air shift. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "we have a document for the court's consideration, to be reviewed in camera." He handed the envelope to the bailiff. A plain manila envelope sealed with red wax, unremarkable at first glance, yet containing enough weight to crush the narrative my brother had built his entire life on. The judge accepted it with mild annoyance. I watched his fingers break, the seal watched the single page slide free. His eyes scanned the letterhead. I knew what he saw: the emblem of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence printed in stark black, carrying authority beyond debate. His face changed instantly. Annoyance evaporated. His posture stiffened, his eyes widened, and for a moment he looked less like a judge than a man staring at something he should not have seen. The silence in the room thickened until it hummed. Mark shifted in his seat, frowning, sensing the shift but not understanding it. My mother leaned forward, confusion flickering across her face. The judge's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the page. He didn't look at me at first. He looked past me at the armed court officers by the oak doors. His voice, when it came, was sharp and urgent. "Officers, seal this courtroom." Immediately. The thud of the locks echoed like a gunshot. The room stilled. Even Mark's smug expression faltered, confusion curdling into unease. The judge turned his gaze on him, eyes hard as steel. "Mr. Jensen, you are a civilian who has made sworn claims regarding the service of a United States government employee. Be advised, this document confirms that your sister's service is a matter of national security." The words landed like hammer blows. My brother's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His certainty dissolved in an instant, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar: fear. I sat there still and calm, watching. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking in silence. My silence wasn't absence anymore. It was power. Because the truth was no longer hidden. It was written in the authority of that letter, in the sudden rigidity of a judge who had just been read into a secret world my family could never imagine. The quiet librarian they had mocked for years had just redrawn the battlefield, and Mark was standing on quicksand. The air in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer a probate dispute, no longer a family spat dressed up in legal language. It had become something else entirely, something that hummed with danger. My brother knew it too. His smirk had vanished, replaced by a stiffness in his jaw. his hands twitching against the arms of the witness chair. But Mark was nothing if not stubborn. He had spent his life surviving on charm, arrogance, and volume. Even now, staring at a judge whose face had gone pale from reading a single page, he tried to rally. "This is ridiculous," he burst out, his voice too loud, cracking under the weight of fear. "She's lying. This is some trick. She never served." "You can't just silence the judge," snapped his voice, carrying an authority that silenced even the creak of wooden benches. "You will not speak again until directed." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My cousin whispered a frantic prayer. The family behind Mark shifted restlessly, the wall of certainty beginning to crack. I didn't turn to look at them. I stayed facing forward, steady a pillar in the storm. The judge handed the document back to David, his voice measured but hard. "This court has received confirmation from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That is all that will be said on the matter. Any further questioning of Ms. Jensen's service status is prohibited. Mr. Jensen, your accusations are now entered into the record as false and potentially criminal." That word criminal landed like a stone dropped into water. The ripples reached every corner of the room. Mark's face drained of color. He turned in his seat, desperate, searching for allies in the gallery. His eyes met our mother's, pleading. She looked torn between outrage and terror, lips pressed thin as if she might shatter under the weight of silence. When no one spoke, he tried again, lowering his voice, this time aiming it directly at me. "Anna, tell them. Tell them it's not what it looks like. Fix this." It was almost funny in a cruel way. The same brother who had spent a lifetime mocking me, dismissing me, erasing me, now begging me to save him. But I didn't move, didn't blink. I had nothing to fix. The judge gestured to the marshals. "Mr. Jensen will remain seated until further instruction. This court is adjourned to my chambers." His tone carried the weight of finality. The bailiff's gavel struck a hollow crack that echoed against the oak panels, and just like that, the power shifted. In the corridor afterward, my family tried to regroup. My mother's voice hissed with desperate anger. "What did you do, Anna? What did you drag us into?" Her eyes darted around as if afraid the very walls were listening. Maybe they were. I didn't answer. My silence was louder than anything she could have imagined. Mark tried to stand tall, but the marshal's presence at his side reduced him. He looked small in a way I had never seen. His expensive suit rumpled, his hair falling out of place. His voice broke as he snapped at me again. "You think this makes you better than me?" You think one of the marshals touched his shoulder, and the rest of his words died. It was over. The narrative he had built, the world where he was the golden son and I was the invisible daughter, had collapsed in the span of a single sealed envelope. But power struggles never end neatly. Over the next days, the phone calls began, first from cousins, then from my mother. Messages pleading for me to make it right, to smooth things over, to remember family comes first. Each one tried a different tactic: guilt, shame, nostalgia. I listened to none of them, because for once the battlefield wasn't theirs. It was mine, and I wasn't surrendering it. The judge's chambers were smaller than the courtroom, paneled in dark wood that seemed to drink the light. Papers rustled, signatures, scrawled legal language, ticked forward like a metronome. But none of that mattered. The real confrontation had already happened in silence, in the look that passed between the judge and me when he read that letter. For the first time, someone in authority had seen me not as a disappointment, not as the librarian, but as someone who mattered. Mark slumped in a chair opposite his lawyer, whispering furiously in his ear. His face was a study in ruin, pale skin jaw, clenched eyes darting toward me as if searching for the sister who used to patch over his mistakes. He didn't find her. That girl had died at the funeral reception when his joke cut me out of my own father's memory. The judge's voice was clipped, professional. The will is upheld. The estate will be divided as written. His eyes flicked to me softer now. And this court extends its apologies to Ms. Jensen for the indignity suffered. He didn't elaborate, but the weight of his words carried farther than any apology I had ever received from my family. Minutes later, we emerged into the gray light of afternoon. The courthouse steps were slick from a recent rain, the air sharp with the smell of wet pavement. I walked beside David, whose silence felt like respect more than detachment. Then I saw them, 2 U.S. Marshals flanking my brother, escorting him toward a black government sedan idling at the curb. Mark's posture had collapsed. The once commanding stride was gone. His steps shuffled, his suit wrinkled, his tie loosened. He looked like a child caught sneaking where he didn't belong. Our eyes met across the distance. His were wide, pleading, hollowed by fear. Beneath the terror, there was something else, a desperate, unspoken question. Will you save me? For a moment, the past flickered. I remembered patching his bike tires when we were kids, defending him to teachers, standing quietly by while he basked in applause. The reflex to protect almost stirred. Almost. But then I remembered the champagne corks, the cruel jokes the years of silence demanded of me, the way he had dragged me into court and tried to erase the only life I truly had. That reflex dissolved. I felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, no lingering anger, only clarity. I tilted my head slightly, just enough for him to know the answer. Then I turned and walked away, the click of my heels on wet stone echoing louder than his pleas. The sound followed me down the steps, each strike a punctuation. Mark, period, period, period. The story was over, for him at least. 6 months later, I stood in a very different room, the Hall of Valor, inside DIA headquarters. The space was solemn, windowless, filled with rows of men and women who lived their entire lives in shadows. General Peterson pinned a medal to my uniform, his eyes steady, with the kind of respect my family had never been capable of giving. The citation was vague commendation for Operation Blind Harvest. The words meant nothing outside that room, but inside they were everything. There were no champagne corks, no thunderous applause, just quiet nods, firm handshakes, and the weight of recognition that mattered more than inheritance or family approval ever could. In that silence, I felt seen, truly seen. A week later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I didn't need to open it to know who it was. My mother. The text was exactly what I expected. Anya, Mark's legal fees are destroying him. He's facing charges. Please, you have to do something. Call someone. Fix this. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for the anger, the resentment, the ache. Nothing came. Just quiet. Just peace. I deleted the message, blocked the number. My family had always believed legacy meant a name on a building or a line in a will. They were wrong. Legacy is a name whispered with respect in rooms the world will never see. And in those rooms, my name was no longer Anna, the librarian. It was Echo 7. Peace didn't arrive in fireworks. It arrived in the quiet. For the first time in my adult life, I no longer felt like I was carrying 2 lives inside one body. The inheritance was settled, the courtroom sealed in silence, and my brother's voice, once the loudest thing in every room, was now just an echo swallowed by forces bigger than him. The weight I had carried for years, the suffocating need to be seen by people determined not to see me, finally dissolved. At DIA headquarters, life went on. Missions rotated, analysts came and went, operations unfolded in whispered briefings. My days were still filled with encrypted messages, long nights bent over maps and decisions that left invisible marks on the world. But inside me, something had shifted. For once, I wasn't dragging the ghost of my family's judgment behind me like a chain. The real family I'd chosen, the men and women in that shadowed fraternity, saw me every day. They didn't need me to prove myself, didn't measure my worth against applause or champagne toasts. Respect came in smaller, quieter ways. A nod across the SIF after a successful intercept, a colleague wordlessly sliding me their last energy bar at 2 a.m., a general's voice steady with trust when he said, "Your call Echo 7. Execute." It wasn't love in the way my mother defined it, but it was deeper. It was loyalty born in silence, in sacrifice, in knowledge that we existed to serve something larger than our own egos. Here, I wasn't invisible. I was necessary. The texts from my mother kept coming for a while, different numbers, same message. Mark needs help. Mark is drowning. Mark is family. Family comes first. Each time I deleted them without reading more than a line. I didn't respond. Blocking her wasn't cruelty. It was survival. One night, I sat at my desk after a long day, the glow of satellite imagery painting my face in pale light. Outside the secure facility, winter pressed against the windows, the world oblivious to the weight of the decisions being made inside. My badge lay beside me, heavy and cold, engraved with nothing more than a number. That number meant more than my family name ever had. I pulled my father's cufflinks from my pocket, the ones I had carried into the courtroom, the ones that had felt like an anchor in my hand. I turned them over in my palm, silver, catching the artificial light. They weren't worth much in money, but they were priceless in meaning. They were proof that at least one person in my family had believed in me, even if he couldn't put it into words. He had written a single sentence into his will to acknowledge my service, and that sentence had changed everything. Legacy, I realized, isn't measured by who shouts the loudest or who collects the most praise at the dinner table. Legacy is what remains when the noise dies. It's the whispered respect in rooms the world will never see. It's the silent nods of people who know what you've sacrificed. Mark would never understand that. My mother would never understand that. But I did. And for the first time, that was enough. I tucked the cufflinks back into my pocket, straightened the stack of classified files on my desk, and prepared for another long night. The world would keep turning, and I would keep doing my work in the shadows, not for recognition, not for applause, but because it mattered, because I mattered. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, mocked, or erased, only to discover your strength when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments. This is a community where silent victories are honored and your voice will be heard. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more family betrayal stories, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next twist. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the loudest truth.